Okay, let's have a word of prayer before we go. Heavenly Father, we ask you to be with us during this last session of the Adventist Health Message. Especially be with Dr. William Andress, that he can share with us the messages according to his experience on the health message. We ask your presence now, be with everyone, be with the students and the school, in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So I already allow you to share your screen. I just say 2 words about Bill. Dr. Andress was my friend for a long time. We crossed pathways, almost crossed pathways in Hong Kong. He was in Hong Kong before me. And then he went to the Philippines, to the AIS. IS, okay. And then he came to La Sierra and was for a while until he retired. He was a professor at La Sierra. So you can introduce better, Dr. Andress. So I will pass the time to you now. Thank you very much.
Okay, first of all, I'm going to need to share my screen here. So let's see if I can get that set up. I want to show a video clip at the end. So how come I cannot optimize for video clip? Maybe because video is not engaged yet. Anyway, we'll deal with that when the time comes. Let me go ahead and click on slides here. Can everybody see my slides, or I forgot to hit the share button?
Yes, yes.
You can see them. Okay.
But just put in the Power Show, okay, PowerPoint show.
Yes. Okay. Let's see. How's that? We good?
Perfect.
Oops. That's not what I wanted to do yet. I need to get some of my things out of the way. How do I get rid of this? There we go. Okay, I want to thank Dr. DeSantos, first of all, for inviting me to give this presentation in the last of his series on the Adventist health message. And today's topic is dealing with the spiritual dimensions of the Seventh-day Adventist health message. When I first began working on this concept, which actually took place when I was living in Hong Kong, a reason that I began exploring it was because, first of all, I found that many Adventists were not aware of the history of the SDA health message. And then also I found that within the Adventist community, it seemed like people would go to extremes. Probably when we talk about the health message, the first thing that comes to people's minds is the type of diet that we're going to engage in. And I found, as I talked with these were members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, that basically there were 2 extremes. There was one group who a friend of mine referred to as Adventists who promote salvation by diet. And they're the kind of people you don't want to invite to your potlucks, because they'll find something wrong with everything. At the other extreme were those who said, hey, what I eat, the way I engage in my lifestyle has nothing to do with salvation. So eat, drink, and be merry, because I know I'm saved, and my actions have nothing to do with my salvation. And I would like to suggest that the truth is someplace in between those 2 extremes. And hopefully today we'll be able to see the connection between the health message and our spiritual well-being. So, first of all, I would like to give you some brief background in terms of my own personal history. Why are not my slides advancing? Okay. I attended Columbia Union College, which is now Washington Adventist University. It's in Tacoma Park, Maryland, in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. My major was theology, and I avoided science like the plague. This is graduation day with my family, my two sisters, one older, one younger. And on my left are my mother and father, and my father's father, my grandfather. You will notice that obesity was an issue in my family. My father, as I remembered him through most of my childhood, was about 5'5", weighed 200 pounds. And I like to say that in my family, obesity was common before it was normal in the United States. And the reason I say that is because here we have a map from the Centers for Disease Control showing the rate of obesity in the United States back in 1985. And I believe this is the first national map that they produced. You can see that at that time, for many of the states, they didn't have data. But for the states that they did have data, you will notice that according to the legend up here, no state had an obesity rate that was greater than 14%. So Pennsylvania, where I grew up, is one of the states that they didn't have data on, but my father and grandfather certainly would have contributed to the obesity rate in that state. Now, if we fast forward to just a few years ago, we see a much different demographic map. And now we see that, looking at the legend here, there is no state with an obesity rate that is less than 20%. And only two states fit into that category, being Colorado and Hawaii. And let me get to my laser pointer here. So Colorado, Hawaii have obesity rates less than 20%. If we look at the majority of the states highlighted in red, they have an obesity rate between 30 and 35%. And then about a third of the states have an obesity rate that's greater than 35%. So if we add this all up, between obesity and just general overweightness, we're talking about somewhere between 71 and 72% of the American population. There's been a lot of discussion as to what is contributing to this epidemic of obesity. I would like to suggest it's due to an affliction of affluence. In the United States, we have a tendency to eat like kings and queens. We go for our lunch at Burger King, and then we finish it off over at Dairy Queen. And this obviously is contributing to the weighty problem that we are faced with in this country. Now, for those of you who are Seventh-day Adventists, you realize that Ellen White played a significant role in the founding of our church. For those of you who are not Adventists, you've probably come in contact with Ellen White at some time in your education at Loma Linda, because professors frequently will refer to her. Seventh-day Adventists believe that she was given a prophetic gift. And so even today, her writings have a great impact on the belief structure of Seventh-day Adventists. And recently I came across a statement from hers that gives a new angle towards what might be behind this epidemic of obesity. She wrote, "The controlling power of appetite will prove the ruin of thousands." And as we near the close of time, Satan's temptation to indulge appetite will be more powerful and more difficult to overcome. So those of you who are working in this field of weight management, you have a very challenging task ahead of you that, according to this statement, the ability to deal with this problem is going to become more difficult rather than easier. So when I look back at my childhood environment, I realized that my way of eating was not very healthy. I'm not going to take time to go into all the details about it. But I realize now that even today, some of the health issues that I struggle with probably had their roots in my childhood and teen years. Within the Adventist Church, if you major in theology, the norm is that during your senior year, you meet with conference presidents. Hopefully, one of them will offer you an internship or will offer to sponsor you to Andress University, the Seventh-day Adventist Seminary in Michigan, and then basically your future is set. Well, all of the conference presidents that I interviewed with didn't really seem to have an interest in hiring me. And it seemed like they were all reading off of the same script, which basically came down to, Bill, are you married? And at the time, I wasn't. And when they found that out, I didn't even have a steady girlfriend. They lost interest in me. So what is somebody with a BA in theology to do for employment if the church is not willing to employ them? So I had been a student missionary to Japan, had kept contact with friends over there. And I went back to Japan to teach English as a second language. And while there, I decided that I would follow the instructions given in Proverbs 18:22. And I went and found a wife. And the Bible says I found a good thing and obtained favor of the Lord. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, 2 months after we were married, I was diagnosed with having tuberculosis. Now, at the time, tuberculosis was one of the leading causes of death in Japan. And I was told that I would have to be on medications for 2 years. Well, my wife and I began doing some study in a couple of Ellen White's books, Ministry of Healing, Counsels on Diet and Foods. And we decided, as we come across things that we are not following, by God's grace, we will try to start incorporating these into our lives. And as we did this, I began to notice that my health was improving quite rapidly. In fact, it improved so much that after 6 months, my doctor said, you don't have to come back and see me anymore. I can't find any trace of TB in your body. You're cured. And at that time, I began thinking, wow, I know medicine alone didn't do this because I was supposed to be on this for 2 years. It must be that the changes that I was making in my lifestyle were able to improve my immune system to such a point that my immune system finally was working the way it should, and I was able to eradicate not only the tuberculosis bacillus, but also I found that my health was improving in other areas as well. When I first met my wife, Miyako, she used to call me Rudolph because frequently I had a red nose from wiping it because I would suffer 5 or 6 colds a year. And I just thought that was the norm. That also is something that has dramatically improved since I made changes in my lifestyle. So I decided that that was the field that I wanted to get into, to help other people learn how they could live healthier lives. But what did I know about health? I had avoided science like the plague. And so we went and spent a year at a self-supporting Seventh-day Adventist Health Institute in northwestern Georgia called Wildwood Institute. And during that time, I was just fascinated with what I was learning about how the human body operates. And I said, yes, this is the field I want to get into. I applied to go to Loma University, The only program that at that time I was eligible to get into because of my minimal science background was the health education program. So I did a dual degree in health education and religion. I was still planning to become a pastor. And then later on, I went and back and at Valley College, got my basic sciences, and then went into the DrPH program. But this is the way Nickel Hall looked at the time that I arrived on campus. For those of you who currently are students there or are employed there, you'll notice that the environment is quite different. Most notably, there is no longer a water tower standing on top of the hill. A few years after I graduated with my doctoral degree, my wife and I accepted a missionary call to work in the Seventh-day Adventist Hospital in Hong Kong. It's the circular building there in the middle. And Dr. DeSantos will recognize exactly where this photo was taken from. As he already mentioned, both of us served there. And actually, Dr. DeSantos followed in my footsteps because he was the one that was hired to replace me once we left Hong Kong for the Philippines. And I'll just throw in this picture of Hong Kong to let Dr. DeSantos reminisce a little bit. This is downtown central Hong Kong, the harbor, and then across the harbor we have the Kowloon Peninsula. But as I mentioned, it was during this time that I began to ask the question, why did God give to the Seventh-day Adventist Church a health message? And as I contemplated on this question, I came to the conclusion that there were three reasons. The first one was that it was literally a life-saving message. And previous presenters have talked about the conditions that existed in the United States at the time that the Adventist Church was in its infancy. I'll just reiterate some of those points and maybe add a couple of other tidbits that add to that scenario. Back in 1850, the average life expectancy at birth was just 39.4 years, about half of what it is today. And one of the reasons for this low life expectancy was there was a high infant mortality rate. As recently as 1875, the infant mortality rate was 17%. In other words, out of every 6 live births, one of those did not make it to their first birthday. Today, the infant mortality rate in the US is less than 1%. And you'll notice that the majority of causes of death were due to infectious diseases. Today, our leading causes of death, that is before COVID, now COVID, the leading causes of death over the last few decades in the United States have been your lifestyle diseases. So one thing that we should recognize from this is that the 8 natural remedies that we've talked about in previous presentations are not designed just to help us minimize our risk of the lifestyle diseases like heart disease, cancer, diabetes, obesity, etc. But they're also very effective in helping to protect us against communicable or infectious diseases. And so at the time that the SDA health message was first given, we have a low life expectancy, and this church was raised up to call people to an awareness of the nearness of Christ's coming. Seventh-day Adventists talk about our foundational message is what we call the 3 angels message, as found in Revelation chapter 14, where it's a message designed to prepare people for the second coming of Christ. Well, how could people give this message when they were dying off in their 20s and 30s and 40s? They were dying off before the message could be given. And so this message was designed at the time to protect against these infectious diseases. Notice what the major endemics and epidemics were in America back in the mid-1800s. As you look at this list, especially those in the epidemic column, these are diseases that we hardly ever hear about in America today. We think of them as tropical diseases, and yet these were the leading diseases of the mid-1800s. The way statement by Dr. Sims, shortly after graduating from medical school, aptly sums up what the conditions of the day were. The practice of that time was heroic. It was murderous. I knew nothing about medicine, but I had sense enough to see that doctors were killing their patients, that medicine was not an exact science, that it was wholly empirical, and that it would be better to trust entirely to nature than to the hazardous skill of the doctors. And so it's within this milieu that right in the midst of the Civil War, on June 7, 1863, in this very house, this house still exists. At the time, this was known as the Hilliard Farmhouse. A group of Adventists had gathered together on a Friday evening for sundown worship. And during this time, Ellen White had her vision, which we refer to as the comprehensive health vision, which laid the groundwork for the health message that Seventh-day Adventists teach. And this building is still in existence today. It is occupied, but not by an Adventist family. And as you can imagine, they sometimes get a little bit irritated because Adventists are constantly coming there to get pictures of this building that has significance in their history. So that was the first reason as to why God gave to the SDAs a health message. It was a life-saving message. Reason number two is I don't believe that God is happy when he sees his children suffering. In 3 John 2, we read, "Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospereth." And so as over time, generation after generation have incorporated these health principles into their lives, we come down to our modern day, and that brings us to another topic that has already been discussed, and that's the blue zones. Actually, it was back in the 1960s that Loma Linda University began doing the first studies that have been known as the Adventist Health Studies. These Adventist Health Studies are in a continuing stage, but the lifestyle of Adventists was really placed on the front page of national news when Dan Buettner, back in November of 2005, was able to have this article published in the National Geographic on the secrets of living longer. And at that time, there were only 3 blue zones: Okinawa, Japan; Sardinia, Italy; and Loma Linda, California. And from this Venn diagram, we can see that each of these different groups had their own unique characteristics that helped to contribute both to their longevity and to their quality of life. But if we look at the center of the diagram, we can see that there were 4 characteristics or 4 lifestyle habits that were common to all groups. And that was a plant-based diet, being physically active, finding meaning in life, and being socially engaged. And so I looked at this diagram, and as I contemplated it, I said, you know, I see in this diagram an acronym. And so I said that the blue zones promote a lifestyle that we can remember by the acronym DAMS. And not only do I think that this is a very apt acronym for synthesizing the components of the blue zone philosophy and lifestyle. But when you think of a dam, what are some of its purposes? So a dam is built on a river someplace. And then behind the dam, water is stored up. And this stored up water usually is in a very Edenic setting. It's an idyllic setting. And when you look at it, you see a lot of recreational activities in it. It's very relaxing, tends to be stress-free. But the dam itself is designed to generate energy. And so I thought, you know, this is what this lifestyle that is represented by the DAM's acronym is designed to do for us. It's to help us enjoy a more relaxed, stress-free, enjoyable life with lots of energy. And belabor this point because other presenters have already talked about this. But if we look at these 4 dimensions, we can find both scriptural and scientific validation for what the Blue Zone researchers have presented to us. So here we see the diet that God gave to man in the beginning. And again, we've talked about this in several presentations already, about how the Adventist diet, which is mostly plant-based, follows this instruction. And as a result, we have lower rates of heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and many other diseases. When it comes to physical exercise, notice that in the very beginning, before sin, God gave man a program that necessitated muscular activity. He put him in a garden and told him to take care of it. And then after man sinned, he intensified his exercise program by telling him, now the exercise that is most beneficial to you will make you sweat. With this concept in mind, I was very intrigued when a number of years ago, I came across this study that was done in Australia. It was a study of 204,000 middle-aged and older adults. And what they found was that physical exercise that makes a person puff and sweat is key to avoiding an early death. What was intriguing to me was in the discussion of the results, they actually said the exercise that was beneficial made the participants puff and sweat. Same language that is used back in Genesis 3:19. Then in Philippians, we're told about the importance of finding meaningful purpose and having a positive outlook on life. Do not be anxious about anything. And our mind should be focused on the things that are positive rather than on negative things. Again, a very interesting study came out by Canadian researchers in which they looked at 6,000 participants. And the title of their paper was Purpose in Life as a Predictor of Mortality Across Adulthood. Their conclusion in this paper was, we've been able to document that a purposeful meaning contributes to longevity. What needs to be further researched, though, is what is the mechanism behind this? We can't explain it. All that we can say is our results showed that this has a positive outcome in terms of longevity. And then finally, social/spiritual values. Within the Adventist community, the meeting together once a week in worship with friends and family is a major factor in contributing to the social dimension of wellness. Back in 2010, researchers from Brigham Young University and the University of North Carolina published a study, in which they said that those with poor social connections had on average 50% higher odds of death in the study's follow-up period than people with more robust social ties. Now, here is what really struck me. That boost in longevity is about as large as the mortality difference observed between smokers and non-smokers. And it's larger than differences in the risk of death associated with many other well-known lifestyle factors, including lack of exercise and obesity. Now, in my professional career, I've conducted lots of stop smoking classes. I've conducted marathon training clinics. I've conducted nutrition and weight management classes. I don't recall ever conducting a class in which I was encouraging more social interaction. And yet, according to this study, that is just as important, if not maybe even more important than the other studies. Okay, the third reason then is a connection between our physical well-being and our spiritual well-being. That the ultimate goal of the health message is to prepare people to live for eternity. If we're just enabling people to live another 8, 10, 12 years of life, we really haven't accomplished much. All we've done is prolong their ability to sin. And so the impetus for coming to this final conclusion is based on one story in the Bible that for the rest of my presentation, I'm going to deal with that in quite some detail. But before I get into it, I have a one-question Bible trivia quiz. And because it's a little bit difficult for me to see everyone, and some of you are not showing yourselves on video. If you know the answer, just unmute yourself and speak up. And here's the question. Who were these men? Shemua, Gaddiel, and Nabi. If you have an idea, just unmute yourself and speak up. I don't hear anyone yet, so let me give some clues. They were contemporaries. They all lived at the same time. They were Israelites. So they were found in the Old Testament. They were all leaders in Israelite society. Okay, well, you're still contemplating on that. I'll start telling my story about the connection between our physical habits and our preparation for heaven. It's a story of the Exodus, the journey of the Israelites from Egypt to Canaan. They had been camped at Mount Sinai for a little bit over a year and a half, and God now told them it's time to move forward. It was an 11-day journey, according to Deuteronomy 1:2, from Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea. Whoops, wrong direction. God declared through Moses, I have given you the land of Canaan, go in to possess it. So God tells the Israelites, I have given you the land. All you have to do is go in and take it. But when they get to Kadesh Barnea, it's decided that first they need to spy out the land. And this is where we find mention of the three men in the trivia question. Here is where the identity of Shemuel, Gaddiel, and Nabi is given. In Numbers 13, we have a listing of all the men who were sent in to spy out the land of Canaan. Now, why is it that out of these 12 men, we only remember Joshua and Caleb? The other 10, we've even forgotten their names, even though they're all listed in that chapter. Well, could it be because of the faith that was demonstrated? We have 2 men who believed God fully. We have 10 other men, 3 of whom are listed here, who did not have faith to go into Canaan. And for me, Numbers 14 is one of the saddest chapters in the Bible, because it's in this chapter where God turns Israel back into the wilderness. So I have a question. Why did the Israelites manifest such a lack of faith when they were so close to their destination? They had seen God perform many miracles on their behalf in the past, but now all of a sudden they lose hope. Well, I think we get a clue in a couple of chapters before Numbers 14. Numbers 10:33, they departed from the mount of the Lord 3 days' journey. So they left Mount Sinai. They had traveled for 3 days. And then verse 1 of Numbers 11 says, and when the people complained, it displeased the Lord. So 3 days into their journey away from Sinai, the people start complaining. And God wasn't very pleased with this. And notice what it was that they were complaining about. They were complaining about their diet. They said, who will give us flesh to eat? We remember the fish which we did eat in Egypt freely, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. But all we get to eat now is manna. And we're sick and tired of it. Manna, manna, manna. That's all we get to eat. Yuck. What lesson can we learn? Here Israel was on the borders of Canaan, but spiritually their hearts were still back in Egypt. And then they complained about the diet that God himself had prescribed for them. So I would like to suggest that in the overall scheme of things, diet doesn't seem to be all that important in terms of our connection with God. And in terms of, my daily life, in terms of trying to build that connection with God, there are other issues that I wrestle with that I think are much more important in God's sight than what I'm eating. But the point here is that the Israelites had never learned to trust God with the small things in their life. Therefore, when they were confronted with the giants in Canaan, they didn't have enough faith in God to believe that he would deliver the giants into their hands. But in that very discouraging chapter, Numbers 14, where Israel is turned back into the wilderness, we find a very encouraging story. It's or a very encouraging text. It's verse 24. God says, my servant Caleb, because he had another spirit within him and has followed me fully, him will I bring into the land whereinto he went, and his seed shall possess it. And so here was Caleb, who stuck up for God, who pleaded with the Israelites, let's go into Canaan. God is with us. He'll give us the land. And God says, sorry, Caleb, you have to wander in the wilderness 40 years with the rest of the Israelites. I tell you, if I had been Caleb, I would have done a lot of complaining to God at that point in time. But not Caleb. He didn't understand why he was being sent back into the wilderness, but he knew that God was in control of his life and that it was safe to trust the direction he was leading him in. Let's fast forward. Israel has finally made it into the promised land, and Joshua is divvying up the land of Canaan among the Israelite tribes. Caleb reminds Joshua that God told him, I can have the pick of any property that I want because of my faithfulness back at Kadesh Barnea. And Joshua says, okay, Caleb, where do you want your headquarters to be? Where do you want your homestead to be? And here's Caleb's reply. I was 40 years old when I spied out the land. I am now 85 years old. I am as strong this day as I was in the day that Moses sent me. As my strength was then, even so is my strength now. Caleb did not only follow God's diet, he followed his physical activity plan. I am in my early 70s. I can assure you, I am not as strong as I was when I was 40. But maybe I have another 10 or 15 years to recoup some of my strength. And then Caleb says, now therefore, give me this mountain. And he points to the mountain where the giants are still holed up. Caleb's thinking, you know, these giants kept me out of this land 40 years ago. I'm going to get rid of them. And he said, by God's help, I will go in and conquer those people. And you can read further on in the book of Joshua where that is exactly what happened. So why do I refer to this story? Well, in the book of 1 Corinthians, chapter 10, Paul says that this story of the experience of the Israelites going from Egypt to Canaan was written primarily as an example and written for the admonition of those who are at the end of time. So this story was written for us, and we can see here that a majority of the Israelites lost out on inheriting Canaan because of an issue over diet. What can we learn from this? Has God prescribed a diet for his people to eat? Egypt is a symbol of the world. Are we clamoring for the worldly diet, or are we engaging in the Edenic diet that God gave to mankind in the beginning? Sometimes this worldly diet is described by the acronym SAD, or the SAD diet, which stands for the Standard American Diet. I think we need to rearrange those letters in the acronym and be promoting the SDA diet, because that is the diet that God gave to his people to ensure that they had a better quality of life, and a life that was long enough so that they could proclaim the good news of his soon return. In closing, I would like to make reference to two individuals who I consider to be modern-day Blue Zone Calebs. Although both of these individuals have passed away, they are two individuals who I knew personally, interacted with them personally, and I'd just like to briefly tell their story as an example of what can happen if one is willing to follow the instruction, the principles that God has laid out for us. By the way, both of these individuals were very sickly in their childhood and into their early adulthood. And it was by making lifestyle changes that they were able to accomplish the physical demonstrations of a healthy lifestyle that I'm about to refer to. So, whoops, wrong picture. That's Dan Buettner. I guess that got in there to show Dr. DeSantos that I guess I ended up attending the same conference that he did when he met Dan Buettner. But let's go to more important people. Here is Mavis Lindgren. At this time, she is 80 years old, running the Los Angeles Marathon. When I first met her, I was in my 30s. At that time, I had never run a marathon yet. And so I told her, I said, Mavis, I'm too young to be running marathons. The other person is Hulda Crooks. Most people today only know her by the park that is named after her in Loma Linda. But Hulda Crooks gained notoriety as being the oldest person to have climbed Mount Whitney, 14,500 feet, tallest mountain in the continental United States. And here Dr. David Neiman is testing her on the treadmill a couple months before she went to Japan to climb Mount Fuji. Those of you who are in the wellness field know that VO2 max is probably the best measurement that we have of one's physical fitness. And these are results that were published by Dr. Lehman as a result of testing not only Mavis Lindgren and Hulda Crooks, but another individual who I never have met, Betsy James. But notice at age 80, Mavis Lindgren had a VO2 max of 38, which is equivalent to that of the average college-age girl. So she definitely was able to demonstrate what Caleb was able to demonstrate, that she still had the strength that she had many years prior to that. Hulda Crooks had a VO2 max of 22 at the age of 90, which was equivalent to a VO2 max of a female 25 years younger than her. And here we have Hulda. She actually climbed Mount Whitney 23 times, the first time at the age of 66. So if any of you have not climbed Mount Whitney yet, it's probably because you're too young. But this was her last successful climb on September 6, 1987. And this was just 6 weeks after she had become the oldest American and the oldest female to climb Japan's highest mountain, Mount Fuji. Hopefully, I can switch over to a short video clip right now.
This is Mount Whitney. At 14,496 feet, it's the tallest peak in the continental United States. Our group has been several days making our way to the top and almost effortlessly leading the way while carrying her share of the load is a remarkably fit and healthy great-grandmother, Hulda Crooks. At age 85, she's well acquainted with each bend of this winding, treacherous trail to the summit since she makes this climb every year. To the other hikers on the mountain's trails, Hulda's familiar face always bears a warm, friendly smile as she stops to share part of her testimony of healthful living.
You young people are my target. I can keep you inspired so that you'll keep on taking care of your health so you can do what you're doing now.
Climbing Mount Whitney has become an annual event for Hulda. She has done so for the past 19 years, starting when she was 66, thus making this effort her 20th triumphant victory.
I think it's my witness, and I'd like to get this across to the young people especially, to take care of their health while they have it, and to keep on a good health program as they go through life.
Hulda says it's not the last time she'll climb Whitney. For as long as she's able, she's going to keep on climbing. From the summit of Mount Whitney, this is Gary Eldridge for NBC News.
Okay, so hopefully her life story is inspiring to you. One thought I would like to leave with you is shortly before she passed away, in talking with her, she reflected on her life of climbing mountains. She has climbed many of the Southern California peaks here. And she said, but you know, all of this is meaningless if I fail to reach the top of one mountain, and that is Mount Zion. And so she now rests in Montecito. Is that the right name? Anyway, the big cemetery just outside of Loma Linda. She's buried there with her husband. And that really is the ultimate goal of our health message. It's to help the people that we engage with to reach the top of Mount Zion. So thank you for the opportunity of sharing with you today. And I'll turn the time back to Dr. DeSantos.
Thank you, Bill. It was very inspirational, as the title says. Thank you very much for that. And we have a few minutes for questions. And then if anybody wants to ask a question, we are open for that. By the way, thank you for the pictures of Hong Kong. That was very deja vu for me.
I think back to the 6 years that we spent there. I have such fond memories.
I don't have a question, but I just want to say thank you so much for all the information, your story, and also the Hilda Crook story that I didn't know those details. Thank you so much. It was very appreciated.
Yeah, I worked side by side with her. She was a volunteer in the department that I was working in. I was able to climb with her on several occasions. I actually was with her on both the Mount Whitney and Mount Fuji record-breaking climbs. One of my goals is to complete a story of her life. I did write with her niece a Reader's Digest edition that is now out of print. But in recent years, I've realized, at the time that she was alive and doing these things, her name was an icon in Loma Linda. Everybody knew Hulda Crooks. But that she passed away. It's been 20 some years now, 26 years approximately. And her record-breaking climbs were in 87. So that's what, 30 plus years. And so I find that very few people know the name Hulda Crooks anymore. And in fact, with my students, many of them know Hulda Crooks Park, but they don't know the story behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. So
I just maybe wanted to make a comment. I
Dr.
knew Hulda Crooks. I used to see her walking the streets of Loma Linda with a backpack on her back when I was living in Loma Linda. So I knew her well.
One thing I found interesting is at that meeting where Dan Buettner spoke, I asked him if he was familiar with her story. And it just really shocked me when he confessed to not even knowing who Hulda Crooks was. Of course, at the time that he was doing his research in Loma Linda, she had been dead for several years. So we can forgive him on that point. But the fact that she was such an icon in Loma Linda and that he would not have somehow come across her name in his research, what was a bit surprising to me.
Well, I think he's probably focusing on the centenarians, which he never made it that far.
No, she passed away at 101.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But that was long after long before Dan Buettner.
Before he came on the scene with his research.
Right. Yeah. No, I knew she made it 100. That's right.
Well, this is the end of this series. I appreciate your attention. I appreciate your presence here. And we will post these recordings. We have 4 already in our YouTube channel, and then there's going to be the 5th one. And then keep in touch, and we will announce when we have another series. By the way, if you visit our channel, we have a series on herbs that you should take a look on that from Dr. Winston Craig. And just to see what kind of things we try to post there. But thank you, Bill. Thank you, everyone. And I appreciate your presence, and I will see you around.
Yeah, good to see you, Bill.
I want to thank you, Hildemar, for putting this series together. This is an area of special interest of mine. And every time I go and look at this, there's always something new that I learn. So thank you very much for putting together this series.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.